stream. Make sure that it's running the way I'd like for it to. Okay, there, good, wonderful. All right. So, this is our last day of regular class. Well, I mean, sort of, I guess. Next Monday, final papers due if you're doing the paper. That's our review day for the final. It's our last day of class, I guess, technically. The final exam is next Friday, for those of you that'll be here for that. Again, those of you that have spring break next week, I'm also going to be here on the 28th, so you can come back if you need to for that. Also, actually, if you're not going to be able to come in next Monday for review, I'm also going to be here tomorrow for my 10 o'clock class to do their review. So if that's actually better timing for you, you can come in tomorrow. Otherwise, it's also online, so if you need that, you can do that. So yeah. Any questions before we finish this off? Great. So, also, just as a reminder, none of what we're about to do is actually on the test. This is all just for me. Like I said, since next Tuesday, I'm going to be in here, I'm going to do the movie day thing, and that's going to be Cold War stuff. I need to, for my own sake, move the timeline to the Cold War. I can't end with, and then the Great Depression started, and then have a movie on the Cold War. My brain won't allow it. So, we're going to very quickly move through the Great Depression and then World War II, but also because there's some important stuff in there that we should probably talk about. So we're going to do that. So I'm going to move through this real quick. I'm going to stop at a couple of points where it's like, hey guys, this is probably some important information that we should maybe look at for the sake of our own lives. So let's do that. So we did last time with Hoovervilles and dust storms, you know, the Dust Bowl, which was a whole extra disaster. We had the Hoovervilles, which I have a lot of pictures of. And then the Dust Bowl, which was this whole extra thing that they did not need. That was just insult to injury. Things, of course, were worse for minorities, because of course they were. When, economic problems hit, the wealthy tend to be just fine. And it's bad for poor white people, and then the poor non-white people are just completely ignored. Because of course. This also is when the Scottsboro 9 happened, where 2 unemployed white women got on a train. There was a fight between white and black men. Well, I say men, boys. 12 black youths between the age of 12 and 20 were arrested. Charges escalated from assault to rape because, of course, there were white women involved. They were almost lynched before they even got to the jail, because this is in Alabama. They were immediately convicted by an all-white male jury, with only the youngest not getting a death sentence, the 12-year-old. There was lobbying from the Communist Party. The verdict was overturned because there was basically no evidence, no legal representation. There were no blacks allowed on the juries because Alabama. No actual evidence, and even a recanted testimony, because the white women in question were pressured into giving testimonies that would give the black boys here the worst possible outcome. all that said, it wasn't until 1950 that the last of the accused was actually finally released from jail. So it was 20 years that these innocent boys were actually like held in prison. So yeah, of course. Here we go. Yeah, look at these hardened criminals that were immediately sentenced to death. And we have a lot of these demonstrations. They called it legal lynching because that's essentially what it was. The government was performing a lynching. They were just going to kill these boys because they were black, and nobody could really stop them. Thankfully, there was enough public outcry that the pressure actually worked, and they were thankfully at least spared the death penalty, and finally, eventually, freed from prison. But it took a while. And here we have the 13th juror, which is just pure racism, because again, obviously. African Americans were the only ones who had to deal with this. Mexican and Mexican Americans were deported in large numbers back to Mexico, despite many of them actually being American citizens. Boy, that's crazy. Imagine that happening. On the West Coast, Asian Americans were marginalized. Had the National Origins Act made it so that the immigrants, Japanese immigrants, Issei, were unable to own land. So even those with college education, known as Nisei, couldn't really do much with their college education. Obviously, the Chinese had similar issues because they were still not allowed to be citizens, despite the fact that 45% of them were born in America at this point. So they had to work with each other. Also, the Filipinos, despite the fact that we had murdered them for about 15 years to make them part of America. In 1934, Congress passed the Tidings-McDuffie Act that gave the Philippines independence, and then also immediately said that they're not allowed to immigrate to America. So it's like, hey, so the whole longest war we'd ever had up until this point, just to make you guys part of America, well, you're not part of America anymore, and you can't come to America. And there's a whole, well, obviously racist thing behind that. Go through this real quick. Yeah, you look like Mexicans, so get out of here. Man, can you imagine that rhetoric? That would be wild. There's college educated. Yeah, anti-Filipino feeling flares up in raids. Islanders taken for rides, told to leave country. Yeah, that's, masked men grabbing people off the street and throwing them into cars. Here we have, get rid of all Filipinos or we'll burn this town down. Anybody recognize the symbol at the top there? It's a group we've already talked about. Yep. That's another symbol for the Klan. So yeah, they hated everybody. Because of course they did. And this is one of their, this is some of their handiwork. There was also, obviously, just families in general dealing with this. Obviously, it hit black families harder because white men were chosen over black men for jobs. White women were chosen over black women for jobs. It's the 1930s. It was bad. It was especially bad for farmers. And workers as well. The big thing here was the bonus army, where World War I veterans had been promised a $1,000 bonus for fighting in the war, but they weren't supposed to get this until 1945, and they were like, hey, we're starving now, we could totally use the money now. So they marched to Washington to demand this money. And after hanging out in Washington for a while and being told no, General MacArthur rolled out and used excessive force to disperse them, injuring 100 and killing 1. So good work, General MacArthur. Before you even rolled off into World War II to do your whole being a hero thing, you used excessive force on World War I vets. Good man. So this is the Farmers Holiday Association, which was our whole thing, with blocking roads and stuff. So where is, yeah, here's the bonus army, and a lot of, they were there in July, so like at night they didn't really need to even take shelter. They just sort of slept on the lawn, because the temperature doesn't really get down too low in DC in July. All they really had to worry about was mosquitoes. Yeah, and then MacArthur came out and just like, there we go. Yeah, started, I wouldn't say mowing them down, but he did bring a tank out. Because of course he did. Anyway, Roosevelt shows up. Things start to get a little bit better, but they're kind of unsure exactly what they could do to fix the Depression. His big thing was, we don't know what to do to fix the Great Depression, but we're going to try everything. We're not going to basically do like Hoover and be real careful about it. We're just going to try a bunch of stuff and do what works. So there was, of course, a lot of blame on Hoover, which isn't entirely fair, though it is funny. It's not entirely fair. It's also a little bit true, but there's nuance to it. I mean, it's not Hoover's fault that the Great Depression happened, but he also didn't do enough to fix it. But also, in his defense, there hadn't been an economic disaster quite like that in American history. So, swings and roundabouts. So, getting into Roosevelt, and also Eleanor, by the way. Eleanor was there. Eleanor Roosevelt was very interesting. We could talk about her the rest of the day if we really wanted to. My grandmother very much liked Eleanor Roosevelt, and she was very much not well behaved. So I look up to Eleanor Roosevelt as well. Eleanor was also a really good shot with a rifle, by the way. Just want to throw that out there. She was apparently like exceptionally good with the gun. Oops, wrong way. And also, yeah, Roosevelt beat the crap out of Hoover electorally. 472 votes, or electoral votes. That's, yeah. Every American has a right to a job, an adequate wage, a decent living, a decent home, medical care, economic protection during sickness, accident, old age, or unemployment, and a good education. Boy, that sounds nice. And again, remember, this is the Democratic president. This is before the party switched. So this is the conservative side. This is the party of small government. The fireside chats, people would listen over the radio, restore confidence in the government. Did a lot of stuff. A couple of things I want to mention. The FDIC. If you've ever been to a bank, which I assume we've all been to a bank at this point now, you go in there and there should be a little, I hope there's a little plaque in there on the counter that says like insured by or protected by the FDIC. If you go into a bank and there's not one, get out of that bank. Do not put your money in that bank. Because the FDIC Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation makes it so that your savings are kept separate from any kind of investments or speculation that the bank does outside of just keeping your money safe in a savings account. Because that's why people lost all their money when the banks crashed, because the savings accounts were tied to investment accounts, and the banks were investing all this money in speculation and stuff, and when the stock markets crashed, your money was gone. Now, granted, that is a federal regulation, and considering all the federal regulations going up in smoke, who freaking knows? But that's just a thing. What else? Worked with progressives, including women reformers, and with Eleanor's urging, appointed Frances Perkins, first woman to lead a cabinet agency, to the Department of Labor, because again, Eleanor was very much a part of all of this, as much as she could be, being the first lady. But she took much more of a role than a lot of previous first ladies. So they closed the banks down so they could keep the banks from just imploding while they put this stuff together. Also, I forgot to say, they ended prohibition, so that they could tax liquor sales, because that made them a lot of money, and B, they wouldn't have to pay to enforce prohibition, which cost a lot of money. Also, most of the cops that were enforcing prohibition were on the take anyway, so that money was being wasted. So here is FDR enjoying him some wine, and boy, people were excited about it. I've got quite a few images of that. What is she drinking? What is this? It's huge. At first I thought she had her hand on the pump here. But that looks like a glass, because it's not even across the top there. I mean, it's even with gravity, but yeah, I don't know what's happening. Here's folks having a great time. This image is doctored. There's not actually a bunch of guys with "We Want Beer" signs. This is another, I think, probably a labor demonstration. They went in and edited the image. But I could also see this, so it's still funny. This image is my favorite. This guy's had a good night. Also because while I didn't see this to this degree in Ireland, I saw stuff in the same vein in Ireland. But it wasn't the Irish, because the Irish could hold their beer. And also the Irish the Irish don't drink like you see stereotypically. It was always the American students that came over and were like, oh, the drinking age here is 18? Great. And then they get smashed because they don't know how to handle their alcohol. Meanwhile, I was there and I was just like, I don't drink. And the Irish students around me would be like, oh yeah, I shouldn't drink as much either. And then they'd order another beer. Like, okay, cool. That was the whole thing. All right, agricultural stuff, Tennessee Valley Authority, which brought a lot of power to the Tennessee Valley. They hydroelectric dams and whatnot. Soil erosion, National Recovery Administration, which was sort of a partial success. It ended up being seen as unconstitutional and struck down. The Agricultural Administration Act, I don't think that's still around, but agricultural federal grants are still like a big reason why farmers really exist in our country the way they still do, because farming isn't a lucrative job. Even like the massive farms that are out in the Midwest, where it's like thousands of acres that are mostly automated, they still have to accept like government subsidies to make a profit, and that's why our food, relatively speaking, is much cheaper than a lot of other parts of the world, because the government like subsidizes farmers since literally the Great Depression. So we've got a lot of that. What else? Do Farmers Holiday Association. Obviously, people were not totally in agreement with this because we're giving government money to farmers for this, that, and the other. And, there's always two sides to things, but I don't have time to get too in the weeds. What else? Hydroelectric dams. More of the farming stuff. There's Tennessee Valley. If you've never been to Tennessee, that's pretty much what it is. It's just lots of valleys and mountains. It's all mountain Tennessee, pretty much. Yeah, there's a good topographical map. I mean, it's just the whole thing. There's a lineman working. I specifically wanted to use this because my grandfather worked with CP&L, Carolina Power and Light. Back in the day, it's Duke Energy now. He worked about this era when you didn't have bucket trucks. You had to climb the pole, and since most poles back then were made of wood, you had to go up with these spurs. You had boots that had metal spikes that pointed down, and you went up the pole with the spurs sticking into the pole. Yeah, that's fun. Because, messing with electrical lines isn't dangerous enough. You got to go up with freaking spurs going into the pole. So if you ever see any really, really old wooden poles, they'll have holes in the side. It looks like woodpeckers got a hold of them. That's what that is. I don't think there's too many of those around anymore, just for the sheer age. Tennessee Valley Authority again. A lot of that. There's the National Recovery Administration, which was real popular, but it didn't do quite enough, and then ended up getting struck down. Here we go. The Federal Emergency Relief Administration did not expect for states to repay the loans. Harry Hopkins was given $500 million to start with and had spent $5 million in the first 2 hours. He didn't worry if a plan would work in the long run because, as he remarked, people don't eat in the long run, they eat every day. This was in direct response to what we saw with Hoover last time, where all of Hoover's plans were work with the economy as a whole, and, okay, make sure I got that on. Work with the economy as a whole, try to fix things as a whole. It's that's great. What about the people starving right now? So we have, and then most of this other stuff was just public works jobs, just put people to work building bridges and roads and public works buildings. This is actually where a lot of our infrastructure today came from, was all of this, which is why so much of our infrastructure today is failing, because it's 100 years old. It's not that this was shoddily built, it's just that it's 100 years old now, and we've kind of been needing to redo it for a while. Whoop, whoop, whoop. See, there's some bridges being built. This is a heck of an image. They did, this is surveying corps. Guys digging ditch. Is that maybe not so much a ditch, but they're getting ready to lay, sewage pipe. Some guys dressed really well to be moving rocks. Dudes hanging out. Forestry work after a forest fire, probably replanting. And as I mentioned in my other class, probably something my grandmother would have liked. She was of that era. And then also another really good one. This was the Civilian Conservation Corps. This was these were civilians, but they were run like the Army. But you get a bunch of 18, 19, 20-year-old dudes together. They're going to goof off when they've got time to goof off. So there they are with a guitar, having a good time. All right, and there's folks treating FDR. Obviously, there were critics to the New Deal. Let's see, DuPont Corporation and General Motors formed the American Liberty League. They compared Roosevelt's actions to socialism and communism, but nobody really listened to DuPont and General Motors. It's like, we don't care what corporations have to say, which needs to be more the rhetoric more often. Communist Party grew. They felt like the New Deal should reach more people. However, as we got near the end of the 30s, what Stalin was up to got public, and the Communist Party pretty much went away in the U.S. Because Stalin was basically killing his own people for fun. I should mention specifically, he starved like 9 million people in the Ukraine, just on purpose, because he felt like they had been disloyal. And so over the course of like 3 to 5 years, he just took all their grain and let them starve to death. And that's why Ukraine's fighting as hard as it is today, because they don't want to be part of another Soviet Union. And the people that are like, oh, well, they just want the Soviet Union back. It's like, Ukraine doesn't, because 9 million people died the last time. And that wasn't even like in a war. That was just being starved to death. So just FYI. Anyway, there's some other people, but again, this ain't going to be a test, so it's not really that important. Is the New Deal socialism? Well, if you ask it like that. Townsend Plan, that's Charles E. Coughlin, which was this Catholic preacher. He had this social justice magazine, and considering the first story in this magazine is Jews plot to ban social justice, you can tell where he fell in the social discourse. And that's the other guy, Huey Pierce Long. He was an actual politician, and apparently he was pretty popular. This was his Every Man a King policy. Anyway, more relief efforts, Works Progress Administration, Federal Writers Project, yada, yada, yada. Again, more federal works projects, building stuff, putting people to work, getting them money, and building us a whole lot of infrastructure. Also, like arts, because as we'll see, World War II, something that Churchill said is like, if we lose the arts, we lose what we're fighting for. The arts are as important as, the guns and bombs and stuff, because, if we're returned to basically barbarians, then we've already lost. So there's this whole everything, and then of course youth versions of these things, motor pools. This one especially, because I put this together when I was working upstate at a technical college, because the room that I was in, or the building that I was in, you could go out. Well, it's not that different here, because there are technical, because we've got Florence Arlington Tech rooms like right across the hall. But where I was actually upstate at Tri-County Tech, you could walk out of the building and right down the hill was the auto shop. So this picture was really good because you could literally just like walk out of my room, go out of the door, and see basically this, but just not quite that old. So I particularly grabbed that image for that, but same idea. sciencey stuff, which, I mean, this is welding, so same sort of shop class. Social Security came about during this time. Wonder how long that's going to be around. 65 eligible workers would receive retirement payments funded by payroll taxes. This was still limited, excluded farm, domestic, and laundry workers. These groups were the neediest, but also disproportionately African American, because they needed the support of Southern Democrats, who have found it distasteful to pay pensions to Black Americans, because obviously. Also, the tax was regressive, so it actually hurt poor people more. But it was still a positive measure to some degree. Let's see. Obviously, some people consider it a whole fraud and all this other stuff, and still a thing today. All right. Organized labor eventually resulted in NLRB, CIO. There was this big sit-in strike. We're not going to get too much into that either. If I went to work in a factory, the first thing I'd do would be to join a union, says FDR. And of course, there was this whole idea of, oh no, the New Deal is just communism. It's like, I know, we've already seen that. So there's the sit-in strike. So rather than striking outside the building, you actually go in and sit down at your job station, which keeps them from sending in strike breakers. And then they had, like, their wives and daughters would come in and bring them food and water and whatnot, so they could stay and strike for as long as they did. Things were somewhat better for minorities. Number of Black advisors were appointed by Roosevelt. Civil Liberties Union was created. Eventually, the Civil Rights Section. Eleanor Roosevelt quit the Daughters of the American Revolution when they refused to allow Marian Anderson to perform at Constitution Hall. And then she brought Marian Anderson to, what do we have here? I've got it in the book. Instead, she brought Anderson to sing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial before an integrated audience of 75,000 and to millions more on the radio. Because when you piss off Eleanor Roosevelt, she's not just going to do what she wants, she's going to one-up you. The most lasting effect was the shift of the blacks to the Democratic Party, which has largely lasted to the present day. Because there was this whole thing of like, here we go. Go turn Lincoln's picture to the wall, a black observer Riley commented after the election. The debt has been paid in full, because now the Democratic Party was helping Black Americans. And this was eventually turning the shift in parties. It would change fully with Nixon, but where like the Democrats were like, oh, we can't be the party with like not social justice. We can't be the party with civil rights, so we're going to go to the Republicans. And that's how the party switch happened. Obviously, though, the New Deal policy still often excluded jobs that were predominantly black. Another group that got partial reforms were Native Americans. So at the very least, the Dawes Act was struck down. Native Americans were given a little bit better deals, but it was still pretty rough for them. Here we go. Here is Eleanor and Marian Anderson. All right. So let's get to the end here so I can quickly go through World War II. He beat the crap out of Alfred Landon in 1936. Union members, unskilled workers, and people on relief voted overwhelmingly for Roosevelt. And then he got in trouble for a vote packing plan to try to basically court packing plan to try and put more people on the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court had been striking down a number of his New Deal policies, and he's like, well, if I put more people on the Supreme Court that agree with me, then I don't have to worry about it. So this caused a number of Southern Democrats to turn against him, but he was still able to pass the Fair Labor Standards Act, set the minimum wage at 40 cents per hour, maximum work weeks at 40 hours. He tried to pull back and balance the budget, which caused a small recession in 1937, which, wasn't great, but here we go. Yeah. Landon got 8 electoral votes. Roosevelt got 523. Yeah, it was it was pretty one-sided. Yeah, that was there wasn't much contest there. No time for donkey business. Like, yeah, I'm sure. And then again, the court packing plan was heavily criticized. All right. So, despite all the gains he was able to make, the Great Depression was not gone. 70% of the country was still unemployed, which was about 11 million people. Most of the New Deal policies only really helped those that were temporarily affected by the Great Depression at the start. So those that were already in bad shape at the start of the Great Depression were just in worse shape now. Most of the wealth remained in the hands of the few. The top 5% of the population held 31% of the disposable income in 1933 compared to 26% in 1939. And it would be, of course, World War II that would actually pull us out of the Great Depression due to all of the industry that happened. So let's quickly do that with the time we have left. So let me pull that up. Because World War II is something that you can quickly breeze through. All right. Come on. So, Kellogg-Briand Pact outlawed war as an instrument of foreign policy, which is totally something you can do. So the foreign policy for the U.S. was to be neutral, which is to say isolationist. Senate hearings concluded that bankers and munition makers called merchants of death had conspired to push the United States into the war. Anyone know what bankers is code for? Nobody want to throw that out there? This is the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. Yes. When they say bankers, they mean the Jews. So when they say bankers or international, it's usually the international bankers, or globalism, or the globalists. They're just saying it's the Jews. Neutrality acts to make it more difficult. Obviously, though, over in Europe, things are not going well. Hitler's in power, installed Nazism, scapegoated Jews and communists. He's got Germany behind him, expanded into Rhineland and Czechoslovakia. England and France are letting it happen. Mussolini's coming to power in Italy, actually before Hitler, but that doesn't really matter. Invaded Ethiopia. Germany and Italy helped the fascist General Francisco Franco in the Civil War, which killed thousands, which we'll actually talk a bit more about in a minute. Yeah, let's just ignore Czechoslovakia so that we can stay out of war. Just let Germany take Czechoslovakia, because we don't want to go to war with Germany. Boy, that sounds familiar. Let's just let a country take another country, because we don't want to bother with them. That's fine. Oh yeah. This is important. So we have the Save Our Sons, No Convoys War, Death for American Boys. Wow, that sounds fine. That sounds good. We don't want to send our people over. This is the America First Committee. Does that sound familiar? So while staying out of war sounds good, they had a specific reason for this, though. If I can use a quote, or to paraphrase Kanye West, there was a lot that they really loved about Hitler. They really liked Hitler. They really, really liked Hitler. A lot. They were pro-Nazi. They had a huge Nazi rally in the Madison Square Garden, like one of the biggest Nazi rallies in the world in the 1930s. So, yeah, that's what the America First Committee is, in case you've maybe heard that being thrown around before. That's where that comes from. Just saying. And don't worry, we'll talk more about them in a minute. This is Guernica. This is the bombing of a civilian town in Spain during the Spanish Civil War by the Luftwaffe, which is, if you're not aware, the Nazi Air Force. Because, well, Hitler's like, hey, Spain's having a civil war. One side is fascist. We're going to help the fascists, and I need to test my Air Force. Let's bomb the other side. And this was made by Pablo Picasso, who, of course, is Spanish, was Spanish. And this is massive. This is a huge, like, billboard-sized painting, which he unveiled at, like, a World's Fair, where the Nazis were. And they were pissed. It was extremely funny. But also, like, showed the world the horror of the Civil War in Spain, which was made worse by the fact that Nazi Germany and Italy got involved. And in case that was too abstract for you, this is what Guernica looked like after. This is what a civilian town looked like after the Luftwaffe got done using it for target practice. So this is before World War II. We're not talking about World War II yet. All right. So eventually, World War II started. Poland was invaded in September 1939, causing France and Britain to declare war on Germany and Italy. Germany and the USSR signed a non-aggression pact for a little while. President Roosevelt tried to maintain neutrality, at least until France and Paris fell in 1940, which shocked everyone because we figured it was going to be another World War I. Britain fought off the Luftwaffe in the Battle of Britain and then was constantly bombed for a while, is just the only way I can put that. But again, those opposed to American involvement organized the America First Committee. They blamed Eastern bankers, there's that again, British sympathizers, and Jewish leaders for promoting war fervor. They also admired Hitler and the Luftwaffe. So, in case you thought I was making stuff up a minute ago, there it is, all in the book. This was written in 2012, so it was before any of the current groups with that name. So FDR was going to get involved, but needed to be careful. 50 obsolete destroyers, passed the Selective Service Act, was the first peacetime draft. My grandfather was already technically in the military at this time because he was a bad child and got sent to boot camp. And since he was technically not drafted, he was allowed to choose what branch of the military he went into. And he was like, okay, well, I know about World War I, and I know about the trenches, so I'm not going to be in the Army. I'm going to be in the Navy. It's like, at least I get a cot. And that was his decision. So he ended up in the Pacific. This was during Roosevelt's campaign for a third term, which was legal at the time. This was before the amendment that makes that not a thing. Lend-Lease Act was passed to circumvent the Neutrality Act, so we could send stuff to Britain, and also naval and air patrols so we could protect these ships, which basically meant we had an undeclared naval war between the U.S. and Germany, not Britain. So here is Poland getting ruined, which, by the way, I know I've said this several times, but were Ukraine to fall, Poland's next. Because Poland was also part of the USSR. And current administration in Russia wants the USSR back. And Poland will be next, is all I'm saying. So there's the invasion of Poland from both sides. There is the RAF. I believe that is a Hawker Hurricane. They had the Hawker Hurricane, and then a little bit later the Supermarine Spitfire, which was seen as the airplane that saved Britain. Spitfire is a really good plane. Here we are. And the wolf chewed up the children and spit out their bones, but they were foreign children, and it really didn't matter. You've got America First here reading from Adolf the Wolf. Dr. Seuss had a lot of these. So, you know, just saying, when people are being disappeared off to, you know, let's just say El Salvador, and it's like, well, they aren't American citizens, so it's fine. Why has President Roosevelt ignored the real solution of unemployment for 7 years? Hear about the menace of the refugee in America. You know, the people trying to escape Europe because you've got a madman sending them to death camps. Yeah, how about that? That'd be terrible. How dare the refugee come to America, the land of, you know, immigrants and refugees. Can't have that. Lend-Lease Act. Come on. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, but the ones that are here now are just like, well, got ours, you can't be here. So, the Atlantic Charter we signed with Britain, we basically began setting the groundwork for the United Nations, and we began essentially just waited for an inciting incident to go to war with Germany. And considering Germany had U-boats and we were sending ships to Britain, it was only a matter of time, right? Well, obviously, as we know, the inciting incident didn't happen in the Atlantic, it happened in the Pacific. Now, despite what you'll usually hear, Pearl Harbor was not a sudden attack out of nowhere from Japan that we totally didn't see coming. We had been butting heads with Japan for about 10 years now. There was questions over Chinese independence. America wanted an open door policy. Japanese had invaded and occupied Manchuria. Encroachment into China, sinking of the Panay and the Yangtze River. Japan joined the Tripatriot Pact with Germany and Italy, so we had embargoed aviation fuel and metal, which Japan had no access to otherwise. So for Japan, the attack on Pearl Harbor was a way to stop the American fleet from stopping them taking more islands in order to get aviation fuel and metal so that they could continue the war. Unfortunately for the Japanese, despite the drama that we often portray the attack of Pearl Harbor as, most of our fleet wasn't there. We were out on maneuvers. So while obviously there was a lot destroyed there, the attack was a failure. It only resulted in us declaring war on Japan and then Germany and Italy declaring war on America on the 11th. So, yeah, we're now at war. So there is FDR and Churchill hanging out in Newfoundland. There is Pearl Harbor. I don't remember the name of the ship, but it's like this is a really famous image. In fact, this is like the end scene in the first mission in Medal of Honor: Rising Sun, which was like one of my first shooter games back on the GameCube. Is it the Maine? No, Arizona. That's it. I remember the dude screaming in my ear, "Oh my God, they got the Arizona!" And you see it like sinking. Yeah, that's the Arizona. And I'm like, why does this ship matter than any of the other ships we've been seeing sinking? Anyway, so the Grand Alliance was not real united. We've got the world's leading colonial power, Britain, the world's lone communist nation, the Soviet Union, and the world's strongest capitalist nation, America. We were only really united in that we didn't like Germany. Since continental Europe was completely under the control of the Axis powers, all the conflict was happening in the Soviet Union. If you ever look at like the, which I think is at the end of the chapter, the like number of deaths. Yeah, here we go. Billions of deaths, dollars. Nope, sorry, not billions of deaths. That would be a little ridiculous. Oh no, I'm thinking my European history class. But like 80% of German casualties in World War II were on the Eastern Front. Were in the Soviet Union. We always are like, oh yeah, there's D-Day, and then we march into Germany and save the day. It's like most of the fighting was done by the Soviets, which we don't like to think about because the Soviet Union was the bad guy for all of the Cold War. But like, they did most of the fighting in Europe in World War II. Again, throwing out a game. Medal of Honor World at War. It's got 2 separate campaigns, and one of them you actually play as the Soviets. And you go from Stalingrad all the way to Berlin. And then the other one, you're in the Pacific, and obviously you're playing as an American. But you actually get to play as the Soviets because you're on the side that you're actually doing most of the fighting. And it's rough. Obviously, Stalin was like, hey, you guys really need to open another front so you can get the Nazis out of my country. The British, though, wanted victories in Northern Africa and Eastern Europe to protect their interests because, obviously, the British are more concerned about their empire. For Stalin, he felt like they were just going to leave the Nazis and Soviets to beat each other to death, which, not entirely wrong. Because, well, I mean, as much as technically the Soviets were on our side, we knew as soon as the war was over we weren't going to be friendly with the Soviets. That wasn't something that just suddenly happened at the end of the war. It's like, oh no, now the war's over and suddenly the Soviets are the bad guys. We were letting them kill each other. I mean, not that, like, we could have done Normandy at any time. That was still, like, a long process of, like, counterintelligence and whatnot. But we let them kill each other for a while. The Americans, British, and Canadian forces tried to invade Italy in July of 1943. We chased Mussolini out of power, but Rome was not captured until June of 1944 because although Italy really doesn't have an army, it does have mountainous terrain, and that's a pain in the ass to fight through. I think we try to do that in World War I as well, and it never works. Italy is not a land you want to fight through because it's mountainous. I mean, you have the Alps there, the Italian Alps. That's a thing. You don't want to fight through the Alps. So the big three, Britain, America, and the Soviet Union, agreed to a strategy to take Europe. Stalin agreed to help in the Pacific after Europe was pacified. So we finally had D-Day, which is, the Normandy invasion. Largest amphibious assault in military history. Paris was liberated by August. Roosevelt won a 4th term and replaced his vice president with Harry Truman, which again was totally legal. This wasn't some special thing that happened. It was just allowed. Most presidents just, after a 2nd term, they were done. But everyone was just like, no, we need to keep Roosevelt. He got us through the Great Depression, and he's getting us through this war. Just keep him in office. So here we have war photographers, the invasion of Italy, the Big Three. Roosevelt's having a good time. There's Normandy. By the way, if you've ever seen Saving Private Ryan or ever played any World War II game ever, which again is why, to me, World at War is such a unique game, because you don't actually start in Normandy like every other World War II game ever. Usually you land on one of the 3 beaches that is gone to hell. You're getting shot at from way out here. So there were 12 beaches in Normandy that they landed at. Most of them were like this. They landed, they got out, everything was fine. Because there was this whole counterintelligence operation, there's a movie on it, that caused the Germans to pull out of their positions and move to the other side of France, basically. Only 3 beaches were actually fortified, and it was the whole Saving Private Ryan opening scene where they had to fight their way up the beach and people were getting shot at and all that. For the most part, it was a completely uncontested, extremely easy invasion because of, again, the counterintelligence, spying, maneuvering thing that was done beforehand, because that's how wars are won. Okay, meanwhile in the Pacific, U.S. shouldered the fight in the Pacific. General MacArthur and Nimitz began a 2-pronged assault. First major victory was at the Battle of Coral Sea off the northwest coast of Australia. Again, if you've ever seen the movie Australia, that just sort of happens out of nowhere. The whole movie, they're in Australia and they're dealing with this idea of being Australian, and there's the Aborigines and the Australian colonizers and this woman from America for some reason. And then it's oh yeah, by the way, this is the 1940s. Japan attacks! And then the Battle of Coral Sea happens, and then it's just gone, and they go back to whatever the hell they were doing. That just happens in that movie for some reason. I remember watching it in theaters and Japan's attacking whatever city, and for a second I'm sitting there, it's why is, oh yeah, it's the 1940s. Japan's right there compared to Australia. That makes sense. And then the Battle of Midway Island, which is the one that we all know about. It's just because it was bigger, but technically Coral Sea happened first. Guadalcanal, Mariana Islands, Marshall Islands, the Philippines. However, the battles of Iwo Jima and Okinawa took massive casualties and showed that the Japanese were not going to just surrender. Because at this point, the emperor wasn't really in charge in Japan anymore. It was the, my brain wants to say shogun, but it wasn't the shogun. It was just, the generals. The U.S. Army was conducting firebomb raids over Tokyo, killing about 330,000 civilians to try to reduce the economy and their ability to continue the war. The firebombings were, in some ways, worse than the atomic bombs. Well, and I mean, just number-wise, they certainly kill more people than the atomic bombs. But again, if you show up next Tuesday for movie day, they talk about people going into the bomb shelters like you would for a bomb attack, and because the fire was so hot, it sucked all the oxygen out of the bunkers and just roasted them. People were diving into ditches full of water to escape the fire and just boiled alive. There was no escaping this. And again, this wasn't the atomic bomb. This was just regular-ass fire bombs, which, when I say regular-ass fire bombs, that's still napalm. This is still in the middle of one of the biggest cities in the world, essentially. So with this and a blockade, the Japanese wouldn't yield. This caused kamikaze attacks because, well, they were running out of fuel, so they basically just, like, would half fill up the planes, like, all right, go out there, drop bombs, and just crash into the ships. Because that was all they had. Also, around this time, like, they were making the katanas out of airplane aluminum rather than steel, because they were out of steel. Also, there's an image of one of the aircraft carriers. I want to throw this in here while we've got, geez, I've only got 10 minutes. Movie recommendation, Godzilla Minus One. It's the most recent Toho Godzilla. It's about survivor's guilt. It's about the main character is a kamikaze pilot who essentially chickened out and didn't want to die. And the rest of the movie is him coming to terms with that, while Japan is dealing with not only the aftermath of the war, because his parents were in, I believe, Nagasaki, and obviously were gone now. And then this huge, horrible mutant lizard shows up, and is not just this huge, horrible mutant lizard, but is the epitome of the horrors of the war and his own psychological scars of survivor's guilt, while he's trying to take care of this orphan that he found, and like his neighbor that also lost her family. And it is really good. It's probably the best Godzilla movie in the 80 years that the franchise has existed. And I really like Godzilla movies. And there are a few out there that are, like, a lot of them are goofy. I grew up in the goofy era, but some of them are extremely good, including the very first one. Like the 1954 original Gojira is about nuclear war and how bad it is and how the survivors are basically helpless. Yeah, watch Godzilla Minus One if you get a chance. Extremely good. Also, that's midway. Another recent one, Shin Godzilla, which is 2016. A bit more showy, blockbustery type thing. But there's a scene where he's building up the atomic ray to fight off the American bombers. And he starts breathing fire straight down into the ground. And it spreads out across the streets of Tokyo. And it looks like this. And as soon as he started doing that, I was like, oh no, this isn't the atomic bomb. This is the firebombing of Tokyo. They're representing a lot of things in this movie. So yeah, really, really good stuff. All right, let me get back to the war. So Yalta Agreement, permanent governments in Eastern Europe with free elections. Russia interpreted this as they're going to keep the lands they take because USSR. Also dealing with how Germany will be treated, etc., etc. Battle of the Bulge, Allied forces pushed into Germany. Berlin fell to the Soviets. Hitler capped himself because he knew what would happen if the Soviets got a hold of him. And it wouldn't be quick. Again, there's a whole SCP article on, like, Stalin being so pissed about Hitler killing himself that he made, like, a immortal clone just to torture. It's the whole thing. It's actually really funny in a horrible way. Meanwhile, Mussolini had been killed by anti-fascist partisans days before in Italy. They pulled Mussolini out of his home, drug him into the streets, and tied him upside down with piano wire. So today, modern day in Italy, anytime someone fascist decides to run for power, they take their election posters and turn them upside down to remind them what happens to fascists in Italy. It's very funny. German troops surrendered. There was the Manhattan Project, which of course created the atomic bomb. Enola Gay dropped it on Hiroshima, killing about 80,000 civilians instantly, and then tens of thousands more due to burns and radiation, which is where our movie starts on Tuesday. If you are able to come for that, I would strongly suggest you to if you are able to. 100,000 more in Nagasaki 3 days later. And then the USSR invaded Manchuria, which would have eventually led to an invasion of Japan. And then Japan surrendered, knowing that they were not going to be able to deal with all of that. So here's the big three again. The Battle of the Bulge, which is, again, more like extreme movie fodder. This is the placing of the Soviet flag over the Reichstag, which is actually how the Soviet side of Call of Duty World at War, not Call of Duty, is it Call of Duty? Yeah, I said Medal of Honor, didn't I? It's a Call of Duty game. Anyway, that's how World at War ends, is you like put the flag, you're that guy. You put the flag up. Oh yeah, Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This is where my dad's side of the family's from. This is where one of the facilities where they built part of the bomb that was used in Japan was built. And there's still like a nuclear facility there. And several of my dad's side of the family still works there because that's where you make the money. Is the nuclear facility, because obviously you're working a government job and you're going to make decent money. So yeah, there is a freaking like nuclear facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. There's the clouds, and there's the aftermath. And then just some after, obviously, the Holocaust happened. There was evidence of either execution or working to death 6 million Jews and 5 million other undesirables. Slav, Poles, Romana people, not gypsies, it's not really the best word anymore. Homosexuals, physically and mentally disabled, communists, basically anybody that was seen as not good. Nazis. Those that were still alive were seen as living dead. They were basically skin and bones. While this was shocking to the public, the military already knew about it, but it was seen as being too risky to go in to try to free them behind enemy lines. Basically, Roosevelt and Churchill decided that it'd just be easiest to defeat Germany first and then go in and free the camps. What was harder to defend was refusing to relax immigration of Jews, in particular those refugees we were talking about earlier, coming out of Germany, because we have a lot of anti-Semitic folks staffing the State Department. And we sent back, although we had 21,000 asylum seekers coming to America, we sent back way more. And they went back often to Germany and then ended up in the camps and died. Because it was the 1930s and anti-Semitism was the order of the day. Can't let in any more of them dirty refugees. There wasn't much left of them. Give me your tired, your poor, send those homeless, tempest-tossed masses, and then, keep out. Yeah, there was a lot of that. Real quick, wartime economy stuff. It created the military-industrial complex. I don't really have time for that. It turned car manufacturers into tank plants. All right, cool. big, I mean, all that stuff we saw in the New Deal was barely a blip compared to World War II economic input. So lots of stuff here. Wartime economy, some more. Come on, I don't really have time. This, for some reason, it's slow. Yeah, a lot more like we saw World War I. Tuskegee Airmen. Do I have any more stuff here specifically? Women were able to work a lot more. Like a great deal more. We had a lot more people going to war in World War I, or World War II than we did in World War I. Rosie the Riveter, Victory Job, Russia. Yeah, the Russian women were often on the front lines. There was some really good Russian snipers that were women. I had a lot of stuff going on the war front. Obviously, with men gone and women working, we had like latchkey kids, victory gardens, the baby boom once the soldiers started coming back. That's where we get the boomers from. Wanted for Murder. Careless Talk Costs Lives. That one's always funny. There's some camp shows, latchkey kids. There is one more thing we got to get to, so I need to move on. Civil rights movement with the FEPC. Basically, there was going to be this huge march to protest racial discrimination, and the thing was, the march was going to protest racial discrimination so they could get the Fair Employment Practice Committee. And Eleanor Roosevelt's like, hey, Franklin, why don't we just go ahead and give them that so you don't have to have the march? And Franklin's like, sounds like a great idea. Let's talk to these guys and get the thing. So they got the FEDC without the march, because the march would have been seen as like a public embarrassment, and they got that done. NAACP outlawed all white Democratic primaries. Congress racial equality, protested directly against racial inequality, which is great. Population shifts. Unfortunately, there were, of course, more riots. But the FEPC was not simply for black Americans, but for everybody, because if they can fire people for being black, then they can fire you for any reason. Because yeah. So same sort of thing here. Mexican Americans were given a hard time because racism, I guess. We had the Zoot Suit riots. That was a Zoot Suit. And by riots, I mean a bunch of Navy guys got off their boats and beat on a bunch of Mexican American kids. And the end result was Zoot Suits were made illegal. One final thing we have to talk about is we sent a bunch of Japanese Americans to concentration camps, in case you weren't aware of that. Men, women, and children pulled out of their homes, given little tags, sent to concentration camps all around America. Once again, George Takei was a child when this happened. He remembers it. There is a musical called Allegiance about this. And also, it not only talks about the concentration camps, but the Japanese Americans that joined the Army, such as the 442nd Regiment, which was one of the most decorated units in the military. So, in addition to the other recommendations I made, check out Allegiance if you get the chance. It's really good. So yeah, this actually pulled us out of the Great Depression. Turn that up. Pushed the U.S. to the world stage, two major superpowers with the USSR, and this resulted in eventually the Cold War. And this image that I pulled out of the recycle bin when I was working upstate, and I was like, this is too good, I have to keep it, and now I've got it forever. So that's it. I kept you guys over time. I apologize. See y'all next Monday for review day. The review isn't up on Blackboard yet. I will fix that.